What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today, where we head into the fantasy playoffs for so many people here in Week 15. So who are we going to start and sit at the running back position, talking every single matchup, because no teams on bye this week means we have a whole lot of players to cover. Plus, we got football on Saturday now. So we have football Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. We got to make sure our lineups are good to go heading into the weekend. The last thing you want to have happen, trust me, I know this from experience, is to be caught with your pants down in an inopportune moment. That hasn't happened to me in fantasy football, but you know what I'm getting at. You want to make sure you're prepped and ready to go, so we're not going to waste any more time. There are timestamps down below. Hit the like button if you like some timestamps, because we're diving right in to Thursday Night Football, the San Francisco 49ers and Seattle Seahawks. And last week proved to be another big week for Christian McCaffrey. 153 total yards, 2 tutties, that's what we're talking about. CMC. But what I didn't like to see was only 3 targets in the receiving game. I'd like that number to be a little bit higher. That's the lowest number he's seen in San Francisco since the very first game he played there, when he was like playing limited, right? Only played like 23 snaps that first week he was in town, because he'd only been in town for like a cup of coffee. That's the same amount of targets he had in that game. So one thing that we can say is Brock Purdy, not a dink and dunker, right? He's not constantly checking down to Christian McCaffrey. We're hoping he's going to be healthy and good to go this weekend, but it's not like we're really worried about volume here when it comes to Christian McCaffrey. He's still going to get over 18 touches per game. He just averaged his highest yards per carry number in a game since October of 2019, and that was at 8.5 yards per carry. Huge efficiency for Christian McCaffrey, but now he gets a matchup going up against Seattle. They allow 26 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's second most in the NFL. Right now, Deebo Samuel is out. Brock Purdy, questionable with a rib injury. Christian McCaffrey, even himself, is probably going to be limited most of this week due to it being a short week. But once again, I expect him to be out there and putting up big numbers. Do I love that it's a Thursday night football game? No, I really do not. Not at all. But with Deebo Samuel out and the quarterback situation still banged up, I'm looking for huge volume. Once again, you know you're starting Christian McCaffrey. Their opponents, nope. This right here is not a sword I'm willing to die on when it comes to the fantasy football playoffs. This backfield is atrocious without Kenneth Walker. DJ Dallas still hurt. Travis Homer not doing a whole lot of anything, and they have a capable passing attack in Seattle with Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. Plus, they're going up against San Francisco. They allow the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs at only 13.1 per game. With no teams on bye this week, this is not one of those situations where you should be overly reliant on these guys. I'm not even touching the backfield of the Seattle Seahawks unless for some reason Kenneth Walker mysteriously goes to 100% healthy, which I don't expect to happen either. How about we go to Saturday football? We got the Indianapolis Colts, Minnesota Vikings, a battle of Jonathan Taylor and Dalvin Cook. You know you're starting both of these guys, but what is the outlook for this game here this week? Right now, Jonathan Taylor sitting at running back 22 overall on the season, but he's top 15 at the position when it comes to points per game. He's coming off the bye week. He's well rested. He's had now 4 straight games with at least 90 total yards. He's had touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games played. And a lot of that has to do with the volume being back for Jonathan Taylor. He hasn't had less than 23 touches in a game over the last month of the season. Now going up against Minnesota, they allow right around 21.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's pretty much middle of the road, sitting at 15th overall. Hoping that offensive tackle Braden Smith can be back, but the amount of big games that we were used to from Jonathan Taylor just last season, they're not there. But with the volume that we're seeing, it's given him a safe floor, and once again, somebody we can actually start and feel pretty good about it in fantasy football. His opponent, Dalvin Cook. He's currently sitting at running back 10 overall, which sounds great, but he's pretty much in a slump right now and being saved by touchdowns at this point. He hasn't even had more than 75 yards rushing in a game since week 10. He's averaging under 2 yards per carry in 2 of his last 3 contests and only has 24 total receiving yards over the last month of the season. He's still getting a lot of touches, though. He's just crazy inefficient, hovering right around 18 touches per game. Indianapolis allows just over 22 fantasy points per game, 8th most in the league, so this is a good matchup for Dalvin Cook. But I can't help but think that a lot of the inefficiencies of Dalvin Cook is due to the injuries on the offensive line and really them not needing him in the passing game. We know offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw. We have Garrett Bradbury, Blake Brandel. They're all hurt right now on the offensive line, and that is hurting the potential efficiency of Dalvin Cook, and we're seeing it in the box scores right now. Obviously, you're not going to sit the overall running back 10 in fantasy football, especially going into the fantasy playoffs, but I'm a little bit worried with how touchdown dependent Dalvin Cook is right now. We need another monster weekend from Dalvin because a lot of people are starting him here this weekend. Next game, the Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns. And don't just look at the graphics. A lot of people will scroll through these videos, they see the graphics, they say, oh, J.K. Dobbins is a start, and they roll on. Don't do that, because some of these guys, I have little caveats to, little asterisks to, and one of them is J.K. Dobbins. Now, this one is going to be a big risk, and he's going to be one of those guys that's a little bit lower in my rankings. People are going to see the big runs, they're going to see the box score, and they're going to think that J.K. Dobbins is back. 15 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. But are we sure that he can sustain that? I mean, take a look at this. Taylor's going to throw up the tweet that I talked about earlier this past weekend with the running form of one J.K. Dobbins. Look at the limited range of motion in his knee. He's not even getting a full leg kick. He looks like he's got a hitch in his giddy up. And then look at this picture. What the hell are these bumps in his knee? This is not normal. And when I talked to the doc, this is kind of what we discussed. When you have a athlete at the level in which he's playing, where he's not 100%, what he's doing is he's putting added strain and stress on other ligaments, other muscles to try to pick up the difference for what his leg is not allowing him to do normally. Because of that, dude is like a ticking time bomb and is in huge risk of re-injury of some sort. And that worries me if we want to start looking at J.K. Dobbins as somebody who's going to get more and more volume, because this matchup is good. Going up against Cleveland, they allow over 25 fantasy points per game, third most in the league to running backs. But we know this is just a team that has struggled on offense. Lamar Jackson is hurt. Now Tyler Huntley is banged up. Multiple offensive linemen are hurting. This is a time they really need to rely on their running game, but can J.K. Dobbins hold up? Because otherwise, you still have Gus Edwards, you still have Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake getting somewhat of the pass game work, which is like hardly any, but still, he's the one that's really most involved in that. J.K. Dobbins, we need some goal line touchdowns, and as much as I worry about putting him in my lineup, if we're going to do it, now is the time to do it, right? He looked fairly healthy. They've already come out and said, hey, he's not 100% healed. I don't want to see anything bad happen to anyone. I'm just not convinced that J.K. Dobbins is somebody that we can put high up in our rankings right away based off of a box score from last week. I'm worried. If you need an injury fill-in, if you're in a league that starts multiple flex players or something, then I feel a lot better about J.K. Dobbins. Having him as my running back too, it worries me. It's a good matchup. You just need to know going in, there's a hefty amount of risk with this one. His opponent, Nick Chubb, and this is not the type of matchup that you want to see for Nick Chubb, especially when you've seen what's happened with him over the last month of the season or so. He's kind of struggled a little bit, especially in the 2 games with Deshaun Watson back under center, but there is a silver lining. Deshaun Watson looked a lot better in his second game back than he did in his first game back, which means the timing is starting to come back, which is good because right now defenses are forcing Deshaun Watson to try to beat them down the field. They know that his timing is off. They know that he's not used to the speed of the game as of right now, and they're trying to take away the running game, put more pressure on Deshaun, and try to force some turnovers. If Deshaun Watson can step it up each and every week, eventually the defense is going to have to pull away, and that'll open up running lanes for Nick Chubb. But that's what's worrisome, is how long is it going to take for that to happen? And now they're going up against Baltimore, which is not ideal. They only allow 17.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is 6th fewest in the NFL. In their last meeting, it was week 7. Nick Chubb had 16 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown. That's also the last game in which Baltimore allowed a team to have over 100 yards rushing on them. They only allowed one team over 75 yards rushing in the last 6 games. Amari Cooper banged up with a hip injury. Anthony Schwartz in concussion protocol. Multiple offensive linemen still out. Cleveland trying to play spoiler in the division because they're really not playing for anything here this year. It's really hard to sit Nick Chubb, but he's more of a top 15 to 20 guy this week than he is a top 5 to 10 guy like a lot of people want him to be, but he's just one of those guys you can't afford to sit. How about the last game there on Saturday? The Miami Dolphins, Buffalo Bills. Started off with Miami. You got Jeff Wilson Jr., Raheem Mostert. And oh, how has the run game fallen off in Miami? Between the injuries on the offensive line, between the running backs themselves not being able to stay healthy and out there on the field, it has been a nightmare couple weeks for the backfield of the Miami Dolphins. Now, if it all wasn't bad enough, now they have a matchup against Buffalo in Buffalo in the freezing cold weather. I don't know how used to that cold weather these Miami boys are going to be. They're going to be out there freezing their nays off, if you know what I'm talking about. And their matchup against Buffalo, they've actually been playing a little bit better here on defense as of late. They haven't allowed over 80 yards rushing in a game over the last month of the season and allowing 18.5 fantasy points per game to running backs, 9th fewest on the year. The best game all year for the Buffalo Bills when it comes to stopping the run was way back in week 4. You want to take a guess who they played in week 4? It was the Miami Dolphins in week 4, and they only allowed 41 total yards rushing. This is one of those matchups where we're going to be heavily reliant on the passing game on both sides, and that worries me. Right now, Jeff Wilson Jr. currently dealing with his own hip injury. It knocked him out of the game at halftime last week. Miami as a team hasn't rushed for over 100 yards since week 10, and right now there's a chance of rain/snow in Buffalo with the temps below freezing. I'm not sure this is one of those matchups I'm willing to risk both of these guys going to be a sit, especially since Buffalo wants some payback from losing there at the beginning of the season. Their opponents, damn it, Devin Singletary and James Cook. Another backfield I'm really not that interested in. They're like allergic to consistency in Buffalo. This is basically a 50-50 split at this point, and you know Josh Allen still going to go in there and get his. The problem is Devin Singletary, highly touchdown dependent, and James Cook needs over 7 targets a game to really be considered in fantasy football. The overall volume just isn't there consistently to trust either one of these guys. It's a good day. If we can get either one of these guys to 15 plus touches, we're great. The problem is that's only happened 2 times since Halloween between these two guys, so it's not something that happens very often. Going up against Miami, they allowed just over 21 fantasy points per game, 12th most. In week 3, Buffalo found a ton of success throwing to their running backs, had 121 receiving yards on 14 receptions and a touchdown to their running backs through the air in week 3. Now, when you look at injuries, most of them on the defensive side of the football, which means Buffalo is having to continue to throw each week. It's why we're not seeing huge volume going this way. But does Buffalo go back to the same well again and start throwing the ball to their running backs? They should, but there's no way of knowing whether or not they're actually going to. If you need one, if you have to gamble on one, I'll gamble with James Cook over Devin Singletary this week and just hope for the checkdowns, but I prefer to sit them both. How about now we go to Sunday football, the Atlanta Falcons and New Orleans Saints. And for Atlanta, they're coming off the bye week, but it's going to look a little bit different in Atlanta. No more Marcus Mariota under center. We're now going to rookie quarterback Desmond Ridder, who will be at the helm for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I mentioned they're coming off their bye week. They've had some time to prep this young kid, and I like Desmond Ridder. He's going to be able to push the ball downfield a lot more than what we've seen so far this year in Atlanta. This is one of those things that's a great thing for Drake London, would have been a great thing for Kyle Pitts, but how does it really affect the current roster? Not a whole lot. I mean, at least the running game probably going to take a little bit more of a back seat. They're going to want to throw the ball a little bit more. Desmond Ridder is also capable of running on his own. So you basically already have a 3-way split backfield with Cordero Patterson, Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley, and now we're adding into the mix Desmond Ridder, who is also capable of running just like Marcus Mariota was. So it's not like we're gaining touches in this backfield. Now, Cordero Patterson, he is still arguably the second best weapon on this team. They need to use this guy more. They're going against New Orleans. They allow 18.9 fantasy points per game, 21st in the league. And the last time these two faced off was way back in week 1. In that game, Cordarrelle Patterson went off. 22 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown, added another 3 receptions for 16 yards. But outside of that game, he's only had one other game where he's exceeded 18 touches. He had 25 in that game. They're just not giving him a lot of volume, and it's really limiting the potential upside. Now, prior to the bye week, we had multiple injuries here on the offensive line that they were hurting there. Hopefully, they'd had some time to heal up here over the bye week. We know that Marcus Mariota could be done for the season as well, so they're going to get a chance to see what they got with Ridder. It's not like he's going to go out there and be pulled halfway through the first quarter. A lower producing and low volume backfield that struggles to get touches in a matchup that's not ideal. I don't know if this is one of those situations that I really want to tempt it with Atlanta either. Neither one of these guys are going to be very high in my rankings. I will tell you this, that Cordarrelle Patterson will be inside my top 30 rankings. More of a boomer bust play here in week 15. Not somebody with a lot of safety, but definitely somebody that can help win you your matchup if they actually give him the volume. His opponent, hey, speaking of boomer bust, or just bust in this case, let's talk about Alvin Kamara. He hasn't rushed for over 65 yards in a game since week 5, only had over 60 yards receiving twice all year, and hasn't had a touchdown since week 8. WTF is going on with Alvin Kamara? I mean, he's still getting the ball. He's averaging over 17 touches per game, but he's not doing a whole lot with it. He's not really losing any work. There's not much of a split in this backfield. Mark Ingram has been hurt, but we have seen his snaps drop now in 3 straight ball games. But they're going against Atlanta. They allow the 11th most fantasy points to running backs in the NFL at 21.6 points per game. Now, he did nothing against Atlanta back in week 1, had like 46 total yards, but this is a team that most of the injuries are on the defensive side of the football. So you'd have to think that Alvin Kamara is going to be more involved in the passing game. We just have not seen that this year. It's apparent that this team in New Orleans in 2022 does not value Alvin Kamara like the past regime did. There is one silver lining, though. In his last 5 games, they were against Tampa Bay, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore. So this will be the easiest matchup he has had in quite some time, a little bit lower in the rankings, but not somebody we can really afford to sit in week 15 of the fantasy playoffs. We've seen this guy go out and get 3, 4, 5 touchdowns in a game before and win you your matchup by himself. Even though he's dropped way down the rankings, I don't know if he's got to the point now where we sit him. Even if he's a flex play at best, we're not sitting Alvin Kamara for the potential upside. What about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Carolina Panthers? You got Najee Harris now, and somehow Najee has climbed up to running back 16 overall on the season in just the last couple weeks. He's had at least 90 yards or a touchdown in 5 straight games now, which is infinitely better than what it was when he started the season here this year. The touches are increasing, averaging just under 17 per game on the year, and I would give Kyle's paycheck away to someone if we could actually get some consistent passing volume to Najee Harris, because they're just not doing it this season. Now they're going against Carolina, a middle of the pack defense against the run. They allow 20.9 fantasy points per game. Right now, Kenny Pickett is in concussion protocol. We don't know if he plays. We don't know if it's Mitchy Biscuits, Mitchell Trubisky. At least it's a better matchup this week than it was last week against the Baltimore Ravens, so that is a good thing. He's for sure in the running back 2 talk once again in a decent matchup, hoping kind of that we have Kenny Pickett here to give him more scoring opportunities in this offense this week. But we're going to start Najee Harris. His opponent, the Carolina Panthers. We got D'Onta Foreman, Chuba Hubbard. I'll mention the name of Raheem Blackshear as well, but this backfield is not quite as clear as it used to be, and it's leading to a little bit of a problem here in Carolina. Now, it was just the D'Onta Foreman backfield for quite some time, but now all of a sudden, touches are being eaten into by Chuba Hubbard. Okay, then they're also being taken away by Raheem Blackshear. All right, this is not ideal in any way for D'Onta Foreman owners, but he's still the clear leader in this backfield. He's still getting volume. They're just not the quality touches like we've seen in the past in the scoring opportunities. He's still averaging over 20 touches per game, but in just the last 2 games played for Carolina, we've seen Chuba Hubbard go over 17 touches a game now, back-to-back games with huge volume for Chuba. It's not really the volume that worries me. Like I said, though, it's the loss of touchdown opportunities. Last week, we saw Chuba and we saw Blackshear find the end zone. Who did we not see find the end zone? D'Onta Foreman, who only has 1 touchdown now in his last 5 games played, going up against Pittsburgh. They allow just over 20 fantasy points per game. DJ Moore is questionable for this game. Not an overall good scenario. This backfield isn't good enough to start 2 guys each and every week, kind of like we see with Dallas, right? We're comfortable with Pollard and Zeke. I can't start 2 of these guys in Carolina. Over the last few weeks, Foreman has showed more consistency with bigger volume. Hubbard looks better as of late, though, if I'm being completely honest. This is a total crapshoot, but if I have to put my finger on just one of these guys for this matchup this week, I'm going to go with Foreman, like, by a hair. By not very much. All right, the Philadelphia Eagles and Chicago Bears. And what about Miles Sanders? He is sitting at running back 8, and I am absolutely loving it. As a day one truther of Miles Sanders, if you've watched this show for years, you know I love me some Miles Sanders. I love to see this finally happen for Miles Sanders. This is what I've wanted to have happen for what feels like forever now. A healthy Miles Sanders that gets consistent touches is a top 12 running back all day long in fantasy football. Now he's had 5 touchdowns over his last 3 games played and over 140 rushing yards in 2 of his last 3, averaging over 17 touches per game. Not much to speak for in the passing game. Would love to see a little bit more go his way. Some of it going the way of Boston Scott, but not a whole lot. Now they're going up against Chicago. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. You can't see it right now. My tail is totally wagging right this second. They allow over 24.6 fantasy points per game to running backs, really hoping that the injury to Lane Johnson from last week's game, that he's good to go here this week. They definitely need him on the offensive line, but this is going to be a freezing day in the Windy City, and the Bears defense probably can't stop the Eagles offense, if I'm being 100% honest, which means more than likely a Philadelphia lead and a lot of volume going the way of Miles Sanders. Give us another big one, Miles, because you're going to be pretty high in my rankings here this week. His opponent, David Montgomery, fresh off of his bye week, should be good to go in a backfield that he still has to himself, because we're still at least another week away from one Khalil Herbert returning. The biggest issues here are the Bears trailing consistently and not being able to commit to the running game, which means a lack of rushing yardage, a lack of scoring opportunities. And if they have him, they're probably going the way of Justin Fields at this point, if we're being completely honest with each other. Now, he's averaging right around 15 touches per game. However, over his last 3 games played, averaging just under 17 per game, and is also seeing 4+ targets a game, which we absolutely love. But they're going against Philly, and Philly on average is allowing 20.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and have really been easier to run on than throw on for majority of the year. However, over the last month, they have greatly improved with the additions on the interior defensive line with Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph. They're really playing better against the run here over the last month. No other major injury concerns here. Don't forget Darnell Mooney, he's done for. But like I mentioned earlier, my biggest concern here is that Philadelphia gets out to an early 2-score lead, and we really can't rely on the running game of David Montgomery very much. That could limit his touches, could limit his offensive opportunities around the red zone. And you can't just survive on yardage alone when you're David Montgomery. You need the touchdown opportunities. He's not going to be very highly ranked, but he will be somebody that we consider starting this week just due to the amount of volume we're hoping he could get. How about the Kansas City Chiefs and Houston Texans? We'll start off with Kansas City. Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. Where the hell did that come from last week, Jerick McKinnon? 13 touches for 134 total yards and 2 touchdowns? And that's not what you call normal, right? I mean, that's a season high in receptions with 7, a season high in targets with 9, the highest snap total he's seen in a game since week 9, all while Isaiah Pacheco continues to be consistent. He now has 5 straight games with 80 plus total yards and touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 games played, and also has 5 receptions over the last 2 weeks. He only had 4 for the entire season prior to that. But now they get a chance to go against Houston, and we know that Houston allows a butt ton of points to opposing running backs in fantasy football. How many, you ask? 27.4 per game. This is a game where definitely both of these guys could thrive once again. But the safety, the consistency, it's going the way of Isaiah Pacheco still and not Jerick McKinnon. This is not something we've seen week after week from McKinnon. There's times where he barely even touches the football. There's not a lot of injuries right now in Kansas City that are affecting the running game. And with Jerick McKinnon being a little bit more of a deeper league flex play in PPR style especially, I feel a lot more comfortable leaning on Isaiah Pacheco and his 15 plus touches a game than I do on the sporadic output of one Jerick McKinnon. It's a good matchup, though. If you want to roll the dice, if you want to play the lottery, Jerick McKinnon may be it this week as well. Their opponent, Dameon Pierce and the Houston Texans, can't start Dameon Pierce, probably because he's not going to play. Now, that's not ideal for Dameon Pierce owners, but a lot of times in fantasy football, when the lead back goes down, we look at who's the next man up on the roster. We're not doing that for the Houston Texans. Why? They got Rex Burkhead. They got Eno Benjamin. They got Dare Ogunbowale. Not somebody that we want to start in fantasy football. It's one of the worst teams in the league. It's one of the worst teams in the league in running the football. They've struggled as of late with Dameon Pierce, so we're nearly not hoping for big things from the guys that are left over. I really can't see them running very much in this game to begin with. So as long as Dameon Pierce is out, we're not touching anyone in this backfield. What about the Dallas Cowboys and Jacksonville Jaguars? We'll start off with Dallas, and yes, we're continuing to start both of these guys like we have for weeks. Finally, it's a backfield that I don't have to sit here and worry about issues and trying to piece together now for the last few weeks. It's another week where they both finished inside the top 12 just this past week. Zeke has now had touchdowns in 6 straight ball games, but he needs those because the rushing totals haven't been there. He's yet to have a 100-yard game so far this year. Pollard, on the other hand, having no issues going out there and getting 100 total yards in a game. He's slightly getting more work in the passing game as well. He's had touchdowns in 5 of his last 6 ball games and over 100 total yards in 5 of his last 7. He's currently inside the top 10 at the position for the year, and now they're going against Jacksonville, who allows the 13th most points to opposing running backs. We saw Derrick Henry run all over this team for like a quarter and a skosh. After that, they locked it down. So they can definitely limit rushing attacks, but can they do that when we still have the passing attack of the Dallas Cowboys? Probably not as easily as we saw last year. The Jags are just no pushover, though. They're actually a competitive team this year. Now, depending on which Dallas team shows up, this could be a pretty fun game to watch. There could be a lot of offense, but we're going to utilize both these guys once again. A great 1-2 punch for the Dallas Cowboys, a great 1-2 punch in fantasy football. I actually have people ask all the time, would you consider starting both of these guys if you own both of them? And the answer is always 100% yes. I'm trying to start guys who score points, and if these guys continually finish inside the top 12, I want to start as many top 12 running backs as I can each and every week. Their opponent, Travis Etienne. And Etienne owners right now are in full abandon ship mode. He hasn't had over 75 total yards or a touchdown in a month of the season. Hell, he only has 3 receptions over his last 3 games played, and they all came in the same game. But I'm blaming a lot of this on the schedule. Look at the defenses he's had to go against here as of late. Tennessee, Detroit, Baltimore. And a lot of people are like, dude, it's Detroit. Detroit hasn't sucked. They haven't allowed 100 yards rushing to a team 3 out of the last 4 games they've played. So those are 3 tough matchups back to back to back for Travis Etienne. But it doesn't get any easier because now he gets Dallas, who allows the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at 16.7 per game. Luckily, Jacksonville fairly healthy. But does this kid all of a sudden suck? No, he doesn't. It's a mixture of an injury that he had there midseason, coming back from that, getting a crap schedule to deal with, and it absolutely derailed him. This is not a great matchup here once again, but I'm kind of hoping to see what we saw last week from Dameon Pierce against this same defense. Can we get in the neighborhood of 11 to 13 fantasy points? I believe that's possible with Travis Etienne, and that's why he's listed as a start. He will just be a little bit lower in the rankings. What about Detroit and the New York Jets now? And someone is messing with us. Like, somewhere the fantasy gods are looking down on us and just messing with us when we see the backfield of the Detroit Lions. There's like a voodoo doll somewhere with this backfield, because they can have two viable starters in Detroit. Both Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift can coexist and be just fine for fantasy football. We've seen it happen multiple weeks this season. But Justin Jackson getting 5 touches for 31 yards and a touchdown, that's not what we're trying to look at here in fantasy football. The dude only had 4 less touches than DeAndre Swift, who only had 9 last week. And then Jamal Williams, even though he had 16, just couldn't get any opportunities inside the red zone because the Lions are throwing the ball deep down the field for deep touchdowns with success a lot. Is this like a blip on the radar, or is this something to worry about going forward? Because now they get the Jets, and they allow 18.6 fantasy points per game, 23rd in the league, but they could be without defensive tackle Quinnen Williams in the middle of that defensive line due to a calf injury, and that would greatly help out here. There's still multiple injuries here on the offensive line for the Detroit Lions. We got Kayode Owosika. Yeah, there's no way I pronounced that right. And Evan Brown. Would love to have them back on the offensive line. But Jay Will is the only guy with consistent touches here. He's the guy that's going to get you double-digit touches every single week. The issue is the potential ceiling of DeAndre Swift is matchup winning by himself. He can pop off at any time. Being that they're on the road in a difficult matchup, I have to trust the guy that I know is going to get the volume, and each and every game, it's been Jamal Williams because he's had double-digit carries in every game this season. Got to chase the volume here. I'm going to start Jamal Williams for the New York Jets. You got Bam Knight, you got Michael Carter. And the Bam Knight hype train is in full effect right now. 90 plus total yards or a touchdown in 3 straight games, commanding the backfield in touches. James Robinson has been a healthy scratch. Michael Carter more involved in the passing game, but not by a whole lot. Really low production from Michael Carter, so we're not overly worried about him either. Bam Knight hasn't had less than 17 touches in a game as a starter, plus has had over 11 points from receiving. So he's still getting an opportunity in the pass-catching game. 11 points over 3 games. It's like the cherry on top for Bam Knight. Now, Detroit, like we've said, though, multiple times, I feel like, in this show, they are no pushover on defense. They no longer suck. They're currently allowing 18.7 fantasy points per game, which is 22nd. But in recent memory here, they have held Dalvin Cook, Travis Etienne, and Saquon Barkley in check. Over the last month, they're playing a lot better. When it comes to injuries for the Jets, we're watching Mike White. How limited is he going to be? Can he throw the sack back in the wheelbarrow and walk it off the sidelines here one more time? Because dude was just getting crushed last week. This is more of a safer floor start. A limited ceiling here this week due to the matchup, though, for Bam Knight. A solid flex. I love the volume, though, so I got him into the start column here this week. What about the Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos? We got James Conner. And right now, my heart is broken. Now, I know the Cardinals weren't going anywhere. But losing Kyler Murray at this time just sucks, because now I have to think that maybe 2023 is going to be bad as well. But aside from that, James Conner got banged up in this game also. But we need James Conner as of right now. He's had over 100 total yards or a touchdown in 4 straight ball games, 12 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games, and now without Kyler Murray, could definitely see a larger role in this offense, plus more receiving work due to the checkdowns from Colt McCoy. Going against Denver, slightly easier to run on here as of late, allowing 19.7 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. We know we don't have Kyler Murray. Rondale Moore still questionable. Heck, James Conner himself is just banged up and will probably, if I had to guess, be limited all week this week in practice. I'm hoping that by the weekend, we get a full practice in for James Conner so that we can definitely rely on him this weekend, because that larger role could definitely help out a lot of people here in the fantasy playoffs. His opponent, Latavius Murray, the Denver Broncos, no. It's an unproductive backfield on a team that is decimated with injuries that can't even score points when they're healthy. That doesn't really sound like a running back that you want to start in fantasy football. He's only scored over 10 fantasy points one time in the last 5 weeks. Arizona may be a good matchup for them, but with all the injuries to Denver, you got Russ in concussion protocol, Cortland Sutton, Mike Boone, Kendall Hinton, multiple offensive linemen. Not a risk I'm taking here in Week 15. What about the New England Patriots and Las Vegas Raiders? And this one hurts my heart as well. Please tell me that we did not just lose Ramondre Stevenson as well last week. Sounds like he escaped major injury, which is good, but he's dealing with an ankle injury that forced him to leave the game just before halftime last week, which absolutely sucks because this is a juicy matchup for one Ramondre Stevenson. We've got to cross our fingers and hope that he plays. But we got to look at this as a just in case he doesn't scenario. So we got to look at Pierre Strong a little bit closer because this kid, when given an opportunity, can be pretty good. He just went 5 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown, another 2 receptions for 20 yards in a half of football. Now, fellow rookie Kevin Harris, he was okay, but Pierre Strong is the one that I'm going to focus on if Ramondre Stevenson is out. He's 3 down capable, big play type of guy, good speed from Pierre Strong. And they're going against Las Vegas. Las Vegas allows the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs at 23.1 per contest. When it comes to injuries, offensive tackle Isaiah Wynn, questionable. We got Jacoby Myers, Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson himself, Devontae Parker, as well as 3 members of their secondary with McCourty, Jalen Mills, and Jack Jones, all questionable as well. Like I said, I'm hoping that Ramondre Stevenson can play in this game, but if he doesn't, all of those X factor points are going to go right over to Pierre Strong, and he's going to be the guy that I start in this backfield. I have a feeling we're just going to have to wait until the weekend comes to really see which way they're going in New England. The opponent, Josh Jacobs. The number 1 running back in fantasy football. You should probably start Josh Jacobs as long as he is healthy. Also, he's coming off another game with 29 touches, 114 total yards and a touchdown against the Rams, but is also dealing with a finger injury, had to have his pinky pop back into place. So that is a concern. One of the highest priorities of a running back is holding on to the football, and if you're dealing with finger issues, that could be a problem. Now, we know when he's healthy, he's going to get touches, he's going to get touchdown opportunities. Not the best matchup for him. New England allows only 15.9 fantasy points per game, but ask yourself this, would you be happy at the end of the week if Josh Jacobs scored you 15.9 fantasy points? Because we just saw James Conner go out there and played pretty well against New England. They actually have allowed over 110 yards rushing now in back-to-back games, and that's something they didn't allow in 5 of the 6 games prior. So it looks like they're a little vulnerable on the ground as of right now. We know there's still multiple injuries on the offensive line, but more than anything, we're watching the injury to Josh Jacobs and that pinky. This is a tougher matchup, some unknown limitations from the injury, something to monitor, but you already know if Josh Jacobs is healthy, you're starting him. How about we go down to Tennessee and the Los Angeles Chargers? Now, my Manscaped matchup of the week. Don't forget the holiday season is right around the corner. If you want to find something great for a loved one, for yourself, to give yourself a present, fellas, buy yourself something right now, wrap it up nice, put it under the tree for yourself, because I guarantee you when you open it on Christmas morning, a lot of people are going to ask you, what is that? And you have a great story on your hands, tons of items. It's not just ball trimmers. They got fingernail clippers and body wash, shampoo and deodorant and lip balm, whatever it is you need, they got you covered. Just use referral code Headliners at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. And this is a no-brainer matchup. You know you're starting Derrick Henry. You know you're starting Austin Eckler. Finally, for Derrick Henry, we saw him go over 100 yards rushing once again. The first time we've seen that in a month. But what's crazy is the dude had almost 100 yards rushing in the first quarter of that game and was really held in check the rest of it by the Jacksonville Jaguars. You hate to see that. We could have had ourselves a huge Henry day. Now going against the Chargers, They allow the fifth most points to opposing running backs at 23 per game. No major injuries that are affecting Derrick Henry as of right now. Hoping for a strong finish to the season. We need vintage Henry this week. And then for Austin Ekeler, he's currently the running back 2 overall in fantasy football. Another big game from Eck just last week. 23 touches, 104 total yards and a tutty. Had 8 receptions as well. That's what we love to see, is that receiving work. The yardage hasn't been great, but with the receptions and the touchdowns, it's keeping him at the top of the rankings each and every week, averaging right around 20 touches per contest. But this matchup sucks for him. Tennessee allows only 16.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and they've only allowed 100 yards rushing to a team one time since week 2. So we're gonna need the pass catching work here this week. We're still waiting on offensive lineman Trey Pipkins to return, but the rest of the injuries are on the defensive side of the football. I'm just glad that in a matchup like this, it's very difficult for opposing running backs. We have a guy capable of catching passes. Right now, Ekeler currently has 112 targets and 93 receptions. Both of those are career highs, and he still has 4 games to play. You're starting Austin Ekeler. How about the Cincinnati Bengals and Tampa Bay Buccaneers? And it was nice to have Joe Mixon back just last week. We didn't see a whole lot of Samaje Perine. However, he did steal a touchdown from Joe Mixon owners, and they were not happy about it. But Perine only 5 touches in the last ball game, where Mixon had 16 and averaged almost 7 yards per carry. But it was a game that the Bengals got beat up in. Mixon could be in line for a lot more work going forward if they're going to have time without T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, still waiting on Hayden Hurst. A lot more potential, and honestly, we could probably see a little bit more Samaje Perine as well. But now they're going up against Tampa Bay. They allow 17.5 fantasy points per contest, 7th fewest in the league, but just allowed 209 yards rushing to the San Francisco 49ers just last week, and allowed 189 yards rushing to the Browns in week 12. So they're not invincible on the ground by any means. We're really paying close attention to these injuries, though. If we're without Higgins, Boyd, and Hurst, we could be seeing a whole lot of Joe Mixon and maybe even some Samaje Perine as well. He's going to be more of a boom or bust type lottery ticket play, though. If I had to look at one guy in this backfield still that I trust the most, it's the guy that gets the bulk of the volume when they're both healthy, and that's still Joe Mixon. Their opponents, Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White. And honestly, this one is hard to figure out. They're both splitting touches, basically 50-50. Both of them have limited touchdown opportunities. Both of them are a lot safer in full PPR leagues. They have 12 targets between the two of them just last week alone. But neither one of these guys are getting huge volume. They're both hovering right around 15 touches a ball game. And White has more work on the ground, which would be great, but he's now fumbled in back-to-back games. Going up against Cincinnati is not ideal either. They're allowing only 19.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But over the last 3 weeks, they've held the likes of Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry in check and been playing super well. This offensive line is in a bad place right now in Tampa Bay, and that's really limiting the upside of anything they can get going on the ground. There is no safe choice here. Both of these guys are risky unless you play in full PPR scoring, and then each of them have a fairly safe floor. I'd like to give White the edge, but the fumbles absolutely terrify me as of right now. Lenny hasn't been able to get anything going on the ground or through the air, but down the stretch is when he kind of seems to turn it on. I'm really hoping you have better options. I have them both listed as a sit. If I had to gamble on one of them this week, it's Leonard Fournette. How about the New York Giants and Washington football team? Sunday Night Football, a rematch here of the NFC East. We'll start off with Saquon Barkley, the running back 6 overall in fantasy football, and coming into I'm talking about a huge division battle, which is a rematch from just a couple weeks ago, a Week 13 tie ball game that we all got to watch there. In that game, he had 63 yards and a touchdown, 5 receptions for 18 yards, but man, we need this guy healthier because he only had 11 touches last week, which is not going to cut it. For the season, he's averaging over 22 per game, and the game we just had last week was his first game of the season in which he failed to get double-digit carries. That's concerning at this point of the season. Washington, They're great against the run. They allow only 17 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the league. Saquon was limited last week with that neck injury. They're missing multiple offensive linemen that are still questionable. Richie James, Daniel Bellinger, also questionable to play, but most importantly is the health of Saquon Barkley. If he goes all week and into the weekend limited once again, I am absolutely terrified to throw him in my lineup, but I don't see how we can get around it at this point of the season. I don't know if you have options to sit Saquon Barkley. I don't know if I'd even want to recommend anyone to sit Saquon Barkley because he's the type of guy that can pop off in a heartbeat, score 20 plus fantasy points, and that's what you need in the fantasy playoffs. I'm just worried about this matchup, if I'm being honest here, this week. Their opponents, Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, coming off their bye week, and I guess we're going back to playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo for this backfield once again, just like we do for Tampa Bay, right? I mean, there's no rhyme or reason as to who is going to get the touches in this backfield each and every week. As of late, it seems like Brian Robinson may be slightly in the lead when it comes to touches in this backfield, but it's not a given. Now, in the last game prior to their bye week, we saw Brian Robinson out-touch Antonio Gibson 23-11 against these Giants, a Giants team that's allowing the 9th most points to opposing running backs at 22.1 per game and have now allowed over 160 yards rushing in 4 straight ball games. Center Tyler Larson, he's on IR. Offensive guard Trey Turner, questionable to play. Needs some improvement there on the offensive line for sure. But really, the only thing I can go off here is who has the highest ability of getting the most volume. And as of late, it's Brian Robinson. He's had 20 plus touches now in 3 of the last 4 ball games, and that's going to be the guy that I start here this week, which will take us to Monday Night Football. Los Angeles Rams, Green Bay Packers. For the Rams, pass, not interested. It was just last week on this very show, and I couldn't even say the word Cam Akers and start in the same sentence. And I don't think I could do it again. The guy even went out and scored a touchdown and still failed to crack 10 fantasy points on the week. It was nice to see 13 touches, but they didn't go anywhere. And if he doesn't get a touchdown, he absolutely kills you. They're not giving volume to Kyren Williams, a whopping 4 touches. The Packers, even though they're allowing over 23 fantasy points per game to running backs, that's 7th most. And they're coming off the bye week. This is just one of those situations where I would love to start one of these guys, but I don't feel safe with either one of them. The offensive line's still not in full force, and you better believe it, we're in line for Bake Show number 2 for LA. Baker wants to throw the ball downfield. We know that's what he wants to do, and the running game is going to suffer because of it. Akers is a dart throw at best if you really need somebody. For the Green Bay Packers, you got Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, both coming off their bye week. Aaron Jones had time to get healthy at the perfect time, which is great. He was banged up prior to the bye week. A.J. Dillon kind of benefited in that last game before they went on bye for sure, but we know going forward, Aaron Jones is the guy, still hovering right around 15 touches a game, where A.J. Dillon's more in that 10 range or so. Going up against the Rams, they ranked 25th, allowing 18.4 fantasy points per game. But like I said, this bye week came at a perfect time for the Green Bay Packers. They could also get back wide receiver Romeo Doubs this week as well, which could pull more defenders outside the box, hopefully open up the running game even more for Aaron Jones. But you got Aaron Rodgers coming off of a bye week in prime time at home in freezing Lambeau. Sounds like an opportunity to fire up the run game and Aaron Jones. All right, there you have it, my starts and sits for the running back position here for Week 15 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you a little bit of information to make your decisions a little easier. If so, do me a favor, hit that like button down below. It greatly helps us out here on YouTube, especially with the season coming to an end. The fantasy playoffs are upon us, and we're trying to win ships this year for Headliner Nation. So if you appreciate that, like I said, hit that like button down below. Leave a comment as well. What is your biggest concern this week for your team heading into the fantasy playoffs? I'll try to get to as many comments as I can down below in the comment section, but for now, I'm gonna get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great night, and we'll talk to you later.